The night Selene found out, she was standing in a ballroom full of people who all believed she was the lucky one. She was 37 years old, wearing a dress that had cost more than her first car, holding a champagne flute she hadn't touched, watching her husband of 9 years raise a glass in her direction as if he were doing her a favor, as if the act of publicly acknowledging her existence on the night of their anniversary gala was something she ought to be grateful for. His name was Callum. No, wait, that name had already been used. His name was Fletcher. No, his name was Rowan Ashby, 41 years old, senior partner at Ashby and Mercer Capital, a man who had built his entire identity on the belief that the world owed him a standing ovation just for walking into the room. His father, Gerald Ashby, 73, sat at the head table like a king surveying his court, already 3 glasses into the evening, already telling the story, the one he told at every dinner, every event, every gathering where people were too polite to stop him, about the Northfield Group. The Northfield Group, private equity, quietly dominant, headquartered in a glass tower in downtown Toronto with a view of the lake that could make you forget, just for a moment, that the world was anything other than beautiful. Gerald loved to describe it. He loved to name-drop the founders, to say he'd known them before they were anyone, to imply, without ever quite saying, that his own success had somehow contributed to theirs. He had no idea that the woman sitting 2 tables away, cutting her salmon into precise, unhurried squares, was the one who'd built it. Her name was Selene Vautrin Ashby, 37 years old, founder and silent CEO of the Northfield Group, wife of Rowan Ashby, and the single most powerful person in that ballroom. She had kept her role hidden from Rowan's family, for reasons that had made perfect sense 9 years ago, and that she had never quite revisited. She'd been 32 when she married him. She'd been careful. She'd been private. She'd wanted for once in her life to be loved for something other than what she'd built. That had been her mistake. She'd understood it was a mistake for about 2 years now. She just hadn't decided what to do with that understanding. Tonight, apparently, the decision was going to be made for her. Rowan crossed the room toward her with the particular gait of a man performing confidence for an audience. He was tall, handsome in the way that required effort and maintenance, and he was holding something, a small flat box in navy velvet, kind, that jewelers use when they want you to understand, before you've even opened it, that what's inside is significant. He stopped in front of her. The conversations nearest to them began, one by one, to quiet. 9 years, he said loud enough for the tables around them to hear. And you're still the most beautiful woman in any room you walk into. Selene looked at him. She had learned, over the course of their marriage, to read the texture of his performances, to distinguish between the ones he gave because he meant them, and the ones he gave because someone was watching. This one had an audience. She could see Gerald already turning in his chair, already grinning, already ready to absorb this moment into the story of his family's excellence. She took the box. The clasp was smooth and cold. Inside, on a bed of ivory silk, sat a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant, a teardrop of what appeared to be alexandrite, surrounded by a cluster of small diamonds. It was stunning. It was exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen herself. It's from a private collector, Rowan said. I had it authenticated, one of a kind. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. It's beautiful, she said. Before I put it on, would you mind if I had it appraised? The room, which had been warmly observant, shifted almost imperceptibly. Rowan's smile held, but something behind it flickered. Appraised, he repeated. I've been doing that lately, she said pleasantly. With gifts, it's just a habit. She had in fact been doing that lately. Not with gifts, with everything. With accounts, with credit card statements, with the small, persistent discrepancies that had appeared over the past 14 months between what Rowan said he was doing and what he was actually doing. She had hired someone to help her look, a forensic accountant named Desmond Park, who worked out of a quiet office in Mississauga, and who had, over the course of 12 weeks, compiled a file that sat in the locked drawer of Selene's home office and that contained, among other things, receipts from a hotel in the Distillery District, a series of wire transfers to a private account she'd never seen, and 43 text messages that Rowan had sent to a woman named Britta Lennox, 29, whom he had introduced to Selene 6 months ago as a junior associate at the firm. Selene had read every one of those messages. She had read them the way you read something that is confirming what you already knew. Without shock, without the sudden collapse of the world, just with a slow and clarifying grief. And then, beneath the grief, something cooler and more purposeful taking shape. She had not said anything. She had waited. Rowan was still smiling. Of course, he said, if that's what you want. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing, because Selene had thought of almost everything, was that the appraiser was already in the building. His name was Aldous Ferris, 61, one of the most respected gemologists in Ontario, and Celine had called him 3 days ago. Not because she'd known Rowan would bring a necklace. She hadn't known that. She'd arranged it because she'd learned, in the years since she'd built the Northfield Group, from a concept and a borrowed office in Kensington Market, that you do not wait for events to unfold. You build the conditions under which they unfold in the direction you need. Aldous appeared from the direction of the coat check, carrying a small case. Several people near the entrance watched him cross the room. Gerald, at the head table, had stopped smiling. Rowan saw Aldous, and for 1/2 second something passed across his face that was not quite fear and not quite recognition, but was something adjacent to both. "Where did you?" he started. "I asked him to come," Selene said. "I hope that's all right." Aldous opened his case, took the necklace with careful hands, brought a loop to his eye. The room had gone very quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when people understand that they are witnessing something and are not yet sure what. It took less than 2 minutes. Aldous set the loop down. He looked at Selene. His expression was the careful neutral of a professional who has delivered difficult news before. "The chain is 14-karat gold," he said. "Genuine. The pendant stone is synthetic alexandrite, lab-created, not natural, and the surrounding stones are cubic zirconia. The total value of the piece is approximately $240 retail." Someone at a nearby table made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a laugh. Rowan said nothing. "He told me it was from a private collector," Selene said. "Not to Aldous, to the room." "Gently, without performance, the way you state a fact," Selene Rowan began. He said it had been authenticated. She turned to look at him fully. "Where did the money go, Rowan?" "The money you told me you spent on this." The particular cruelty of the question was that it was the wrong one, or rather, it was a smaller version of the right one, the one she wasn't going to ask here, the one that would come later, in a room with lawyers and documents. She asked this one because it was the one that would land, because everyone in this room understood jewelry and price, and the specific humiliation of a husband who had pocketed the difference. Rowan's father stood up. "Now, just a minute, Gerald." Selene's voice was even. "Please sit down." Gerald Ashby had not been told to sit down by anyone in approximately 40 years. He sat down. She looked at her husband. He was still handsome. He was still performing, even now, some residual version of composure, though it had developed cracks. "I think," she said, "we should talk, but not tonight." She set the necklace back in its box. She handed the box to Rowan. She picked up her champagne flute and took, for the first time that evening, a long and unhurried sip. The marriage had not always been this. That was the thing that made it complicated to explain. Not to lawyers, not to Desmond Park, but to herself in the early mornings when she was honest about it. She had met Rowan at a conference in Vancouver 11 years ago. She'd been 26, still in the phase where the Northfield Group existed mainly as a framework and a conviction. He'd been 30, newly made partner somewhere, radiating the particular energy of someone who has just discovered that ambition, applied correctly, produces results. They had talked for 4 hours in the hotel bar. He had been funny. He had been genuinely curious about what she was building. He had looked at her like she was interesting. She had not had many people look at her like that. Her parents, Rosalie and Marc Vautrin, had emigrated from Montreal to Ottawa when she was 11. They had been loving and exhausted, and not particularly equipped to know what to do with a daughter who, at 14, had organized the school's entire fundraising infrastructure and rewritten its donation tracking system because the original one was inefficient. She had learned early to make herself smaller in rooms where being herself was inconvenient. Rowan had not made her feel like she needed to make herself smaller. For a few years it had been real. She was sure of that. He'd known she was building something significant. He hadn't known at that point how significant. And he'd been proud of her in a way that felt genuine. He'd introduced her to people as the most underestimated person in this city, and she had loved him for it. She couldn't trace exactly when it had changed. It had been gradual. The way the color drains from a room as the light shifts so slowly that you don't mark the moment it happened, only the eventual fact of the dark. He'd started to feel diminished by her success. She had seen it happen with other couples, other men, and had told herself it wouldn't happen with them because Rowan was different, because he'd chosen her knowing what she was. She had been wrong about that. Or not wrong, exactly. Just optimistic past the point where optimism was justified. He'd started traveling more. Started coming home with the particular exhaustion of someone who is managing more than one life. Started having opinions about her work that he presented as concern and that she recognized, after a while, as resentment. She had not at any point told him the extent of it. He knew she ran the Northfield Group. He did not know the number. He had never asked directly. And she had always deflected gracefully. And she understood now that the deflection had been its own kind of mistake. You cannot be known by someone who only knows a version of you. And you cannot be hurt, not really hurt, by the loss of someone who had only loved the version. She had known about Britta Lennox for 14 months. She had spent 14 months building what Desmond Park called in his measured accountant's vocabulary, a complete picture. The picture was complete. She told her closest friend, Joelle Marchand, 53, managing partner at Garnett & Associates and the person who had been Selene's sounding board since they'd met at a women in business dinner 15 years ago on a Tuesday evening over tea in Joelle's kitchen in Rosedale. She spread the documents out on the table, the transfers, the receipts, the messages. Joelle read through them without speaking. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been sitting on this?" she asked. 14 months. Joelle looked at her with an expression that contained, Solène thought, equal parts admiration and alarm. "What are you waiting for?" "The right moment," Solène said, "or the moment he creates for me." Joelle picked up one of the hotel receipts. She set it back down. "Does he know? About the Northfield Group?" "All of it. He knows I run it. He doesn't know the valuation. He doesn't know the board structure. He doesn't know about the October acquisition." "The October acquisition," Joelle repeated slowly. The October acquisition had been the largest private equity deal in Ontario in 6 years. It had been covered in the Financial Post, the Globe and Mail, and 3 international trade publications. The Northfield Group had been identified throughout only as a Toronto-based private equity firm, by Selene's deliberate instruction. "He read the Globe coverage," Selene said. "He commented on it at breakfast, said whoever had done that deal must have had serious nerve." Joelle was quiet for another moment. "He doesn't know it was you." "No, and his father has been talking about the Northfield Group at dinner parties for about 3 years, yes." Joelle set her mug down. She looked at Selene the way she had looked at her at that first dinner 15 years ago, with the particular attention of someone who is recalibrating what they understand about the person in front of them. "Selene," she said, "what are you planning?" Selene had thought about how to answer that question for a long time. The honest answer was not revenge. She had examined that word carefully and found it didn't quite fit. What she wanted was not to hurt Rowan. Or not only that. What she wanted was accuracy. She wanted the truth of her life to be visible. She had spent 9 years allowing her husband to believe a comfortable, scaled-down version of who she was, and she had done it out of a desire to be loved that she now understood had been, in part, a kind of self-betrayal. She wanted the record corrected. She wanted to stop making herself smaller. "I'm not planning anything specific," she said. "I'm just ready, whenever it happens." It had happened at the gala. After the ballroom, after Aldous and the velvet box and Rowan's face, doing things it had never done in public before, after Gerald had sat back down and stayed down, after the room had rearranged itself into smaller, more urgent conversations that she knew would continue for weeks. After all of that, Selene went home. Not to the house in Forest Hill that she and Rowan shared. She went to the apartment in Liberty Village that she had leased, quietly, 8 months ago, and that contained a bed and a good coffee maker, and the particular silence of a space that belongs entirely to one person. She had a call with her lawyer, Theodora Park, not a name from the list. Her lawyer, whose name was Winifred Clough, 64, the most formidable family law attorney in Toronto according to 4 separate people who had no reason to flatter her. Winifred had been holding the documents for 11 weeks. "I assume the timeline has moved up," Winifred said. "Tonight felt like a natural moment. Gala. Anniversary gala. He brought a $240 necklace. A pause. He brought it where? In front of approximately 80 people. I had it appraised on the spot. Another pause. Longer this time. You had an appraiser present. I'd arranged it in advance. I didn't know about the necklace specifically. I wanted to be ready." Winifred made a sound that Selene had come to recognize as the sound she made when she was professionally impressed by something she also found slightly alarming. "The petition is ready. I can file tomorrow morning if you'd like." "Please." She sat in the apartment after the call, in the dark, with a glass of water she wasn't drinking, in the quiet that was different from the quiet of the house in Forest Hill. That house had always been full of a particular kind of silence. The silence of things not being said, of rooms you walk through carefully, of a life arranged around the avoidance of certain conversations. This silence was different. It had space in it. Her phone showed 12 missed calls. 4 from Rowan. 3 from Gerald. 2 from Rowan's mother, Agatha Ashby, whose primary skill had always been appearing in moments of family crisis with an expression of concern that was, under examination, more accurately described as outrage on behalf of her son. 2 from numbers she didn't recognize. 1 from Joelle, which she'd call back in the morning. She did not call any of them back. She opened her laptop instead and reviewed the board materials for the Monday morning meeting. The Northfield Group had 3 active portfolio companies, 2 pending acquisitions, and a quarterly report that was, by any reasonable measure, the best in the firm's history. The numbers were clear and unhurried and entirely her own, and she read through them until it was after midnight, and she was tired in the good way, the way that comes from work rather than from endurance. Rowan called 47 times over the following 6 days. She did not block his number. She let it ring. She let him leave messages, 23 of them. Each one a different iteration of the same arc. The first few were explanations. The middle ones were apologies in the specific register of a person who has been caught but has not yet understood what they have been caught in, and the later ones shifted into something she recognized as the performance of contrition. Stressed, confused, pressured, a difficult period, none of it quite adding up to the word that would have been accurate, which was simply wrong. He showed up at the Forest Hill house on the 4th day. Winifred had advised her not to be there, and she wasn't. She was in a meeting at the Northfield Group's boardroom on the 42nd floor of the tower on Bay Street, looking out at the lake, listening to Reginald Foss, 58, her head of acquisitions, walk through the due diligence on a development project in Waterloo. She had told no one at work about the gala. She hadn't needed to. There had been board members present. Her assistant, her assistant, Odalis Crane, 31, had texted her the morning after with a single message, "Heard what happened, anything you need?" She had written back, "Monday meeting, same as scheduled. Thank you." It was Gerald who appeared at her office unannounced on the 5th day. Not at her home, at her office. He had found the address. Not difficult, given that the building was listed and her name was on the wall in the lobby. And he had arrived at 11 in the morning, wearing a suit and the expression of a man who believes that presence alone constitutes a form of argument. Odalis called back to say a Gerald Ashby was asking to see her. Selene looked at the lake for a moment. "Send him in," she said. He walked in the way he always walked into rooms, with the particular propriety of a man who has decided in advance that his presence is welcome. He stopped when he saw the office. It was a significant office, floor-to-ceiling glass. The view, the scale of it, the quiet authority of a space designed by someone who knew exactly who they were. He looked at the wall where the Northfield Group's founding statement was printed in clean sans-serif letters. He looked at the board table, long and serious and set for 12. He looked at Selene, sitting at the far end with a cup of coffee and a stack of documents and no particular expression. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I know you didn't. Rowan doesn't know the extent of it either. He will shortly when the financial disclosure portion of the proceedings begins." Gerald sat down in one of the chairs along the wall without being invited to. He looked for perhaps the first time since she'd known him, like a man who had run out of the story he was telling. "He's not a bad person," Gerald said. "He made mistakes." "He did," she agreed. "Selene, Gerald." She set down her coffee. "I spent 9 years not telling your family what I'd built because I wanted a marriage and not a business arrangement. That was my choice. I don't regret it. What I regret is that the marriage wasn't what I thought it was, and I waited too long to deal with that clearly." She paused. "Rowan can speak to Winifred Clough's office if he has questions about the process. You are welcome to use the elevator on the left. It's slightly faster." Gerald looked at her for a long moment. She thought she saw something shift in him, not quite respect, not yet, but the beginning of a revision, the early and uncomfortable work of understanding that he had been wrong about something important for a very long time. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked once more at the Northfield Group's name on the wall. The company he had praised at dinner parties. The company he had described as an example of what real enterprise looked like. The company he had held up, to his son, as proof that somewhere out there were people with actual vision. He walked to the elevator without another word. The petition was filed. The financial disclosure came 3 weeks later as part of the preliminary proceedings, and it was there, in a conference room in a law office on King Street West, with Rowan and his counsel on one side of the table and Winifred and Selene on the other, that the number appeared for the first time in a room that contained Rowan Ashby. She watched his face. She had thought about this moment. She had thought she wanted something specific from it. Confirmation, perhaps, or a particular quality of understanding crossing his face. What she actually felt, watching him read the document, was something quieter and less dramatic than she'd anticipated. Sadness, partly, and beneath the sadness, something that she eventually identified as relief. Not triumph, just relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying a weight for too long and has finally in the right place set it down. Rowan's lawyer leaned over and said something quietly to him. Rowan did not respond. He was still looking at the document. "This is accurate," Winifred said. "This is the Northfield Group. It is." He looked at Selene, and she understood, watching him, that he was not simply processing the financial number. He was processing something else. A kind of retrospective disorientation, a recalibration of everything he had believed about the shape of his life. He had thought he was the successful one. He had thought the scale tipped in his direction. He had thought, she knew this now with certainty, that if the marriage ended, she would be the one diminished by it. She hadn't said anything. She just looked back at him steadily, without anger and without comfort, with the clear and unhurried gaze of someone who has stopped making herself smaller. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was different now. The performance was gone. "I know," she said. "That was partly my doing. I should have been clearer a long time ago." She was not going to apologize for building what she had built, but she could acknowledge, honestly, that she had carried her privacy past the point where it was serving anyone well, including herself. Solon. He said her name the way people say a name when they are at the edge of something and do not know what comes next. "I'm sorry." She had waited for those words longer than she should have. She knew that now. She had waited for them in the house in Forest Hill, in the particular silence of rooms where too much was not being said, and they had not come, and she had kept waiting, and in the waiting she had lost something that was not coming back. "I believe you," she said. "It doesn't change anything, but I believe you." The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Winifred described the settlement as efficient, which was the closest Winifred got to enthusiastic. Joël took Solène to dinner at a restaurant on Ossington, the kind of place with no sign outside and a menu that changes every week, and they talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. The way you talk with someone who has known you long enough to not need the summary. "How do you feel?" Joël asked, near the end. Solène thought about it genuinely. "I feel like myself," she said. Maybe for the first time in a while. Joël raised her glass. "That's the only thing that matters." Solène raised hers. Outside, Toronto moved through a clear October evening. The lake smell coming up from the south, the early dark, the particular quality of light that made the city look like it was made of good intentions. She walked home afterward, through streets she knew well, past the building where she had first rented an office the size of a closet and worked 18-hour days and believed, with a certainty that had never quite left her, that the thing she was building was real. It was real. It had always been real. She had just needed, finally, to stop pretending it was smaller than it was.